What's up everyone? You guys already know who it is. We're going to do another video about the Galaxy Note 3 and I've already done one this year, hence why I said we're going to do another one. But I just did a video about the Galaxy Note 4 yesterday and a lot of things have changed since yesterday, alright? But no, seriously, a lot of things have changed since the original video of the original Galaxy Note 3 in 2018, and I like doing a lot of these updated comparisons later on in the year. I plan on doing another one of these for next year, but for right now, we're going to look at the Galaxy Note 3 and how it holds up in the later part of 2018. Now, I've already stated this, a lot of things have changed. We've had a new Android OS version, Android 9.0, but more importantly, we've seen the successor of this line of phone, the Galaxy Note 9. So it's kind of cool to look back and see how the older phones hold up now. Now, the Note 3 actually came out in 2013, so it's a little bit over 5 years old at this point, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. I mean, think about it. If you're like a dad watching this video, chances are potentially that this phone is older than your child who was less than 5 years old. Now that's the dumbest thing I ever said in my life, but I mean, there's some merit behind it, And when I'm holding the phone and, when I'm playing with it, I'll be honest, it doesn't really feel that cheap. It's not built well. There's a difference, I've had like a $10 Huawei phone that I bought from Best Buy like 2 years ago, and that is a very cheap phone, but it doesn't really feel that cheap. And it might be the price thing. The Galaxy Note 3 isn't necessarily the most expensive phone, and I forgot to mention this yesterday, but because of that, it kind of has the effect of being like, it's only like $70, so it's really not that bad. And I guess the Note 3 is kind of in that same realm, but it doesn't feel premium. That's 100% fact. I mean, even like the iPhone XR feels way more premium than this thing, but it doesn't feel, cheap in my opinion, even though it's pretty much built out of plastic. Looking at the front though, I think this is one of the reasons it doesn't feel that cheap. It's because of the screen. It has a 5.7-inch 1080p Super AMOLED screen, and in my opinion, I think this screen on the Note 3 looks far better than the screen on the iPhone XR. I don't even care about the AMOLED part. I mean, I love AMOLED screens, don't get me wrong. I just don't like the fact that the resolution is so much higher on a 2013 flagship that I think at the time cost less than the iPhone XR that was released in 2018 that doesn't even have this high of a resolution screen, which is crazy. The Galaxy Note 3 screen is not even that good, but I think it's better than the iPhone XR screen. The only problem is the Note 3 had a low PPI. I think the iPhone XR screen might be higher. I didn't really do too much research, so don't murder me if that's the case, but that's kind of what I've been thinking. The Note 3 screen is not bad though. The home button is also there. There's no fingerprint sensor on it. You do have two capacitive buttons on the sides of the home button. I always like the capacitive buttons, especially, at this time, because there were phones with this much bezel on the screen, probably even more than the Note 3s, but they had navigation buttons on the screen, which is crazy. So like phones like the Nexus 4, the Nexus 6P, the Nexus 5, I think some LG phones too, but LG did a pretty good job at limiting the bezels. They would have the same amount of bezels as the Note 3, even more, but not even have any use to the bezels. That was crazy. But thankfully the Note 3 actually took advantage of that and put buttons there. And a cool thing about the Note 3 as well is that it does have a removable back with a removable battery and removable storage. So this phone is probably like the end all be all. I wish the momentum kept going with those two things, removable batteries and removable storage, but phone manufacturers got to make money and they got to make you update, so this is one of those reasons that the Note 3 is still pretty popular. One of my most popular still worth it videos for Androids was of the Note 3. I think the main one, I think the most watched one was the Galaxy S7 in terms of the Android realm. So that's pretty interesting. A lot of people like Samsung and there's nothing really wrong with that. And looking above the screen, we do have a 2-megapixel front-facing camera, which is kind of weird. They should have put like a 5-megapixel camera, but I'm not going to hate on it too much. The main competitor of this phone was the iPhone 5S, and that I believe had a 1.2-megapixel camera, so they were all kind of in that realm. But the back is actually pretty interesting. There's a 13-megapixel camera on it, and it's not horrible at all. I think it's pretty decent. The cool thing is, okay, I'll say that the photos that it takes are okay. They're good enough. I'll probably say they're like a 5 out of 10. I haven't really messed with it too often, but just know that's the case. But one really cool thing that Samsung does is that they add so many features into the camera app. So you can do so much. You can do all sorts of different features that you probably couldn't do on like an iPhone 5S. You couldn't do on like a Nexus 4, Nexus 5, whatever the competitor was at the time in 2013. And it had way more features than the stock Google camera app for many, many years. And even now, I'll definitely say that Note 3 has more features in the camera app than iPhones do, than Google Pixels do, and it's just crazy. They just literally, that's like a pro and con because they bloat their software with there's so many different things, whether you need them or not, and they really bog down the memory of it. But I'll say the photos might not be that good now, but they were extremely good at a time. And on top of that, Samsung features that they put into the camera app are really, really crazy. Now turning it on, we actually have Android 5.0 Lollipop, which is the latest version it got. It's pretty embarrassing. and obviously it's pretty outdated now, but it runs kind of well on it. You're on an older phone and you have older software, so it's not like it's running Android Oreo or Android Pie. In terms of software, you're pretty outdated. But one really extremely important thing you have to keep in mind is that this phone is actually capable of being rooted and custom ROMmed. So if you want, you can go and throw a custom ROM on it, and there's so many custom ROMs out there to choose from. I don't think there's an Android 9.0 ROM for it, but I'm pretty sure there's an Android 8.0, maybe even an Android 8.1 ROM for it. So I would really recommend you guys to do your research and figure out whether if you want this phone or not, whether I'll tell you in the end of the video, but which ROM you should choose. And I think there's some custom kernels out there for it too, so you can flash those and actually get much better performance, possibly. I don't know if there's any kernels, but there could be, so that's always an option for this. And that kind of leads me into performance as well. I mean, I'll say this, it has a quad-core processor, it has an Adreno 330 GPU, and it has 3 gigs of RAM, which is pretty crazy, I'll say. And those specs on paper are pretty respectable, and because it does have that outdated software, it does have Android Lollipop, I'll definitely say performance isn't really that bad just because it's outdated. It's like you're putting iOS 12 on an iPhone 1, it won't run at all. It probably wouldn't even turn on if that was somehow possible. But if we put iOS 1 on an iPhone 1, it'd be blazing. It'd be like the craziest thing ever. And that's kind of the analogy I put here. This phone isn't running Android 8.0, it's not running Android 9, it's not running the latest version, so it really doesn't have too much to power because the Android Lollipop was made for older phones. And in that case, I mean, the Note 3 is pretty decent on the software, but the problem is when you start using apps that have been updated a little bit more. And I'll give you an example. When you have a lot of apps in the background, whether they're new or not, most likely if they're new, you're going to suffer from this problem. It's not even that big of a problem, but when you click on it, it does take in like extra second or two to load up an app. It has 3 gigs of RAM though, so it really shouldn't be too big of a problem in terms of RAM management. But that's kind of one thing that I've been seeing. And also, this kind of goes into gaming. I think gaming is pretty decent. If you play games like Real Racing 3, it's going to be pretty choppy, and a lot of other apps are going to be choppy too. But if you're playing like really like low quality, low graphic games like Temple Run and things like that, you're not going to run into too many problems. But when you play heavier intensive games, Samsung's phones, especially around this time, have had this problem of just heating up like crazy, and this phone is no exception. This phone does heat up a little bit. I'm not going to say it's extremely too much, but it is kind of weird. But I don't want to give it a bad rep. Casual gaming is perfectly fine on this, but like I said, heavier games are going to have problems. Real Racing 3, it's choppy, and it could probably play, but from the specs alone, I mean, I would probably assume it could play pretty decent, but it is what it is. So, I don't really have any answers to that. But kind of moving on to a different topic, and what's good of having all this performance if like battery life isn't that good? And I'll say battery life is not horrible. I would say it's very average, okay? And even though it had decent battery size, I think it was over 3,000 milliamp hours. The chip inside mostly and the deterioration of the battery causes battery life to suffer for the most part. I said suffer, but I meant to say suffer. So if you guys want to judge me about it, go ahead. But I'm going to remember that I said that. I'm never going to figure it myself. But a great thing about the Note 3 is that it does have a removable battery. So I would 100% recommend people to pick up a new battery possibly and put it in there. And I would say definitely go get a bigger one. I think a lot of companies out there made much bigger batteries for the Note 3, and I think there's like a 10,000 milliamp hour one or something. So I'd really recommend, if you're in the market, definitely pick it up. If I remember, I will leave a link in the description below so you guys can pick it up too. And if you pick it up from there, you also help the channel. But another small thing, I always leave it at the end of the video because a lot of people like it, a lot of people don't, and it's kind of unfair because a lot of phones don't even have this feature. But the Note 3 had the S Pen, which is a crazy thing. It's like an Apple Pencil, but for your phone. And I honestly wish more phones had it because it's super cool, it's super useful, and to keep in mind, a lot of phones really aren't doing things like this even now. It's like you're using your phone and that's it. There's really no like extra utensil or anything. And a lot of people say, oh, well, why would I want to use a stylus? Everybody hates stylus, but this is more than a stylus. If you're someone who, likes to have, that's the same thing of like, why do we have mouses and keyboards when everything's touchscreen, Some people like some things, other people like other things, and I'm personally the one who, I like both, I like having a mouse and keyboard, and I like having a touchscreen, so I like having a stylus, and sometimes I don't. It really just depends what you're doing, and I'll say in the case of the Note 3 and actually the whole entire Galaxy Note lineup, this S Pen was one of the greatest things they ever did, and I salute them for it. But a slight thing to keep in mind is that if you do flash a custom ROM, on some ROMs, you actually lose S Pen support. I think the stylus still works, but you don't have those features, obviously, that Samsung TouchWiz has, so kind of keep that in mind if you do plan on like flashing a custom ROM on it or something. But to answer the question, is the Galaxy Note 3 still worth it in the later part of 2018? What I'll say is that it's super dated in updates, okay? It's probably like 3 years behind, 4 years probably even at this point. So it's not as secure, it's not as fast, and it's overall just not as good as more modern day phones. Even modern day budget phones are much better than this thing. But what I will say is, if you need a backup phone for any reason, if you plan on cracking your phone, or if you need a phone, you're going hiking and you just need like something to bring with you, this is not a bad option. I'll say it's pretty much worth it. So if you fit in that criteria, I'll even throw in the people who are like, you don't plan on keeping a phone for more than like a month or 2 months, a month and a half even. I said yesterday in the Note 4 video, you should probably plan on keeping it no more than 2 months, just because of the outdated software and things like that. In this case, I'll probably say like a month and a half, man, like max. There's really no reason to even have this phone anymore, because there's so many more phones that are much cheaper. And I'll even tell you this, I've seen a lot of these go recently for around $80. Like this phone, for some reason, is still like not that cheap. You could easily get a Note 4 for the price you're paying for a Note 3 potentially. And even a Note 5, I've seen some Note 5s go for like around $100, sometimes even less than that. So I would kind of suggest getting a Note 5 just because it's like $20 or $30 more. I'll even say, man, save up like $50 more and just go get a Note 5. I will 100% back that idea, rather than you going and getting a 2013 flagship and actually using it. So, I mean, it's fun to kind of mess with flash ROMs and stuff like that, but to actually use as your daily phone, I mean, I feel like you could potentially like limit yourself in a lot of ways, but I still think the Note 3 has a bit of life left in it, just a little bit. But for the vast majority of people who are watching this, I probably wouldn't recommend it. But I'm not taking away what this phone brought. This phone brought a lot of stuff to the table, a new kind of redesign. I think this design of this phone was pretty good. I think even now it still holds up. It looks even better than some phones that are still released within the last like 2 years. It's pretty crazy, but that is pretty much all I have to say. But I want to know what you guys think though. Do you guys think the Note 3 is still worth it? Do you think it's not? Leave your comments in the comment section below. I'll see what you guys have to say. But hit that like button, that'll mean so much. But definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel is also linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check those out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.